All right. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to talk to you about creating meaningful entertainment and how the art and design departments can come together to question your morality as a player. So, first, please let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Thomasz Kisilewicz. I came to you from Warsaw in Poland, where I am currently a lead artist at 11-bit Studios. And also a follow-up to the previous lecture, you can also study something completely different and start doing video games, as you can see on this slide. However, more important for the topic of my lecture than who am I is who are we as 11-bit Studios, and who are we as a company, what lies deeply in our DNA. Now, to understand that, we would have to take a look at our motto. Just give me 1 second, because this microphone is haunting me. All right, that should work better. Okay. So the motto goes by meaningful entertainment, and that is something that the heads of our studio has established some time ago, when they were trying to define what kind of games are we making and what kind of games we want to make in the future. So we're saying we want our players to feel that their game experience, the choices and the decisions they make while playing our games, that they really matters, that it all has a sort of a meaning. Now, we grew as an indie company, and even though in time we grew up much in scale, we still feel as a part of indie movement. So what we're saying is we want to be an alternative to AAA titles by delivering AAA quality games, but putting a certain twist on the gameplay and on the narrative devices that we're using. So I would say we want to think different, and while I know that it's quite a worn-up slogan nowadays, we also are addressing our games to want to think different, who want something else from their everyday entertainment. But the thing here is that being innovative in such a fast-paced and demanding and so constantly changing industry as game development, at times it can be really hard. Now, you're always saying in creative process that you have to think out of the box. But in game, that thinking out of the box many times means thinking about the box, designing it, creating it, getting out of it, thinking and repeating that process over and over and over again until hopefully one day something clicks and you can get this experience that you were looking for from the very beginning. Now, to understand that better, let's take a look at some examples from the past. Now, in 2011, it was just a year after our studio was founded, we have released the Anomaly Wars on Earth. And that was like the middle of indie apocalypse, and this small title from a debuting studio from Poland was able to gain a wide audience, and it sold very well on all major platforms. Because among hundreds of quite generic tower defense titles, there was this one that decided to go an opposite direction. Now, we had put a literal twist on a tower defense genre by switching the rules and creating something new, a tower offense game. And that led to a fresh and creative gameplay, but it also helped in a marketing process of the game. But then we would have to move our clocks 3 years forward. Now, how many of you did play this War of Mine? Oh, okay, good, perfect. So yeah, it was November 14th, 2014, and we released our new title, This War of Mine. Now, the game was a great success. It sold over 5 million of copies up to date. But at the very mechanical core, it was just a survival game. Now, there are some pictures from an early prototype. It was a shelter that you had to upgrade and craft some stuff. You had some basic scavenging mechanics. The uniqueness of the title came with the idea for the setting and a thematical wave of the game. We wanted to create a war game that's told from a civilian perspective. Now, the picture I'm showing to you actually explains very well what we were aiming at. Now, this is a screenshot from the very first teaser. And on the left side, you can see the soldiers fighting in the streets. Now, that's your everyday action. We've seen there, we've been there, we've done that many times before, shooting other enemies in a video games. What we wanted to do was to look behind the closed doors on your ordinary Call of Duty map, and we wanted to start a conversation about the drama of the people that takes place right next to your everyday entertainment. Now, in the movie industry, there is this term of an elevator pitch. I'm pretty sure you're aware of that. And it basically means that your story is good if you're able to pitch it to another person during a single elevator ride. So a war seen from a civilian perspective, now that's pretty clear there, right? But video games, it's quite a complex medium that I really like the other definition, and it's called a grandmother pitch. So it basically means your idea is clear and good if you can pitch it to your grandma or grandpa or any other not related to video games person in few sentences, and they get it, right? So one day I actually did that with my grandmother. She asked me one day, like, what is this video games buzz and what are you doing at work at all? And so I told her, well, I'm working on this war game, but you're not like fighting anyone, or at least you're not trying to. You just basically want to live by the end of the war. You want to survive, get some food, get some medicine. And she was stunned. Like she could not comprehend that video games, something she connected with such a pure fun and entertainment, could touch the topics like this one. And now you have to keep in mind that we're talking about the person that still very vividly remembers the horrors of the World War II in Poland. And she asked me, like, can you even do that? And we could, and we did, but her reaction has haunted me for some time and reminded me once again how big was the responsibility we have as developers of a game like this War of Mine. But let's move couple of years forward. It was April last year, and we're releasing our biggest title up to date. Now that was the biggest budget, the biggest amount of people working on it. It was a society survival with some city building elements. Yet again, it was heavy in difficult choices and moral dilemmas. That game was called Frostpunk, and it was a game that had turned back the 4-year development cost in just 66 hours, being #1 top seller on Steam for a couple of weeks. So, in this brief introduction, I had showed you 3 brand new titles with original stories and settings, and these were all 3 new and successful IPs in a day and age where everything that's not a sequel or a reboot or an adaptation is being considered, and rightfully so, is being considered a high risk. So all those games, apart from being our games and apart from me bragging about them in front of you, what do all of them have in common? Well, first of all, these are some creative and unique ideas, but they were also followed by some strong and distinct visuals. You see, for us at 11-bit, always the key is to define and then properly execute your message. Now, we would have to take a deeper look into this War of Mine example, because at some point we knew what kind of a story we want to tell and what kind of an experience we would like to deliver, what kind of thematical wave you would like to deliver to our players. But it was extremely important to find and balance a proper tone that would serve those purposes very well. As we wanted to touch a very delicate matter. Now, war is something that is still extremely vivid and relevant to a wide part of our audience. The story and the setting in this War of Mine were strongly influenced by some modern conflicts, like the Balkan area or Sarajevo siege, the Kosovo or Chechnya crisis. So it was our burden as developers to talk about war in a respectful but also very impactful way. And in order to do so, we had to find proper tools in both the gameplay and in the visuals. When touching those delicate matters, on one hand, you don't want to be too subtle, because a message that you want to deliver, it might be too vague, it might get lost somewhere in translation. But on the other hand, you can't go too hardcore, as you might be getting dangerously close into the gore territory, making your game too cartoonish or too vulgar. And in the end, you would be undermining this meaningful experience that you are working on. Now, this slide is actually a great example because a few months ago, I was having a talk in Copenhagen, and there was this conference about morality and ethics in video games. And I had a very similar slide prepared in my presentation, but the difference was for the right part of the graph, I used a different picture. It was a close-up of some bodies. And immediately the slide appeared on the screen. I have realized I've made a terrible mistake. Like, just by looking at the faces of the audience, there were many academics, people with a deep insight into theme of ethics in games. I saw by the reaction I went too far. I've chosen a bad picture. And my first thought was, obviously I screwed up this presentation. I have undermined what I was talking about. But I think in the end, I ended up with this anecdote that proves how thin of a line we were working on. So the misery of those people touched by war, it is not a subject that you would like to exploit. But I'm talking about those people, and I've mentioned it a few times already, but at some time in the process, we had to ask ourselves a question: who are those people? Who are those civilians that are touched by war that we wanted to talk about? So the question was obvious. They are everyday men and women just like us, like me, like you in the audience, just regular people facing a war that is coming to their doorstep. They are us. That's why we decided to literally put ourselves into the game. And as you can see, we used our pictures and photos. Now, all characters in the game have a portrait with a picture of somebody from our office, our coworkers, our friends, people from our circles. That's actually me chatting with my girlfriend in an abandoned bar, because we didn't only use photos, we literally put ourselves in the game using 3D scans to create the characters there. We used the first generation Kinect to scan everyone and actually have those models in a game, but here there was another important we have to remember, like this could not look staged. So we didn't use any makeup and we were always dressed in our everyday clothes. So all those things had put like a controlled level of realness into our game. And in our art department, we used the term of layers. So with this War of Mine, that was a layer of realness. The story was also supported with some real photographs taken around our offices. Those photographs appear to mark some important events in the game. But even here, it couldn't be too staged, and we didn't want to show too much. We didn't want to go, again, too far, too hardcore. It had to be proper in tone. So even the framing was important for us. Again, we didn't want to be too literal, especially with topics like this one, like death. That's actually one of my favorite examples. Because sure, we could be showing just the guy hanging on the rope, but putting it this way, we knew we were delivering the message in an effective and a direct way. But putting ourselves into the game has created a new danger. I mean, these are all our friends. Some of the staff kits were even scanned for the game, for the DLC, and you don't want to see your friends or kids being killed in the video game. So that led us to a second layer we used. We called it a layer of novel, of a visual novel. We had to create a style that would help us distance players from the horrors of the story that was being told throughout the game. And in the process, the team looked at many inspirations from the music video, from the film. For those of you who did play the game or have seen the game, you can see the inspiration here. That's a cut from an Aha music video, for example. And we were also influenced by street art, Banksy, and graffiti in general, mostly because these are the devices that, they help bringing strong message in a very clear and direct way. But also due to some striking, iconic graffiti pictures, from Bosnia that influenced us in creating this world of Pogoren. So all of that, all those devices created a final image of the game. And you can see all those elements apparent on the picture. You can see that pencil sketch style with graffitis. So a certain mood and tone had to be set. And it brings on feel of a drawn story, feel of a novel, but it's not perfectly real. Because as an art department, we had to help designers in anchoring players into the world that we were all creating, to make our players think about war drama in general. And also we wanted them to face dilemmas. But what kind of dilemmas really? Some kind of big world-changing decision-making? What kind of choices do they have to face? Something that maybe could change the course of the war? Well, definitely not. I mean, unless in action movie terms or something else, like civilians usually at war, they don't change the course of the history. They face everyday problems. So those dilemmas had to be real and believable, as we were touching personal events and personal dramas of everyday men and women, some small personal decisions. Like people asking for a shelter. Do we have enough resources to allow that? Do we have enough food? Do we have enough space for that? Or one of my favorite, when you're stepping by an elderly couple and they have a pastry full of food while you and your people are starving to death. Now, what are you going to do? Maybe you can take just a little bit. Where do you draw the line? Now, in fact, the world we created was so coherent and the message so clear that even some bugs were being interpreted as a feature. Now, this is one of my favorite examples. This location you see on the screen, it's a supermarket. And very early on, when the game was released, one reviewer from France, he was amazed because when you're coming to this location, there is a group of scavengers, and they tell you, well, there's enough stuff for all of us. You're safe here. We're not gonna hurt you. So he believed them, and when the night was coming to an end, this group they turned against him and they killed him. And the reviewer, he was so amazed, like, that's great, because usually in a video game, when NPC tells you it's safe to be here, you're really safe. But not in this case, because this is like a real war. The thing is, there was a very funny bug, because by the end of the night, the group was leaving the scene, and once the first person from the group left the scene, all the other NPCs has recognized this as him being dead, therefore him being killed by a player, therefore they turned against the player and killed him. But the reviewer loved it, and I think it's a proof of how coherent this world was. That's all because while working on this war of mine, we always had to look back at the main message that we were trying to convey and some pinpoints that we have defined. And we wanted to make sure that we stay true to this message and that the tools that we're using to present them were properly selected. But in the meantime, we finished that game called Frostpunk, and now that was a whole new thing to handle. How many of you have played Frostpunk? Another question. Okay, so it's like a quarter of this war of mine. Okay, that's great. But for those of you who did play Frostpunk, if you could answer this question in your heads, like, what is Frostpunk? What the Frostpunk really is like at its core? Because I told you already that it is a society survival city builder. And while it is a catchy phrase, it's certainly like a premise that may catch your attention, but I feel like it doesn't necessarily paint any image inside of your head. Like, what kind of game is it going to be? It's a city builder, so is it going to be more like city skylines, or is it banished? Is it survival? What kind of game is it? So let's dive a little deeper. Now, Frostpunk is a society survival city builder based in an alternative reality of 19th century England. So now we got a bit more information here. So we've got 19th century England, and it's a city builder. So we can imagine the Victorian-esque architecture and maybe clothing of the people, because you need to have people as it's a city builder. But again, for those of you who did play Frostpunk or who at least had seen some materials from the game, you know that that's not all that Frostpunk is. So let's do it one last time. And Frostpunk is a society survival city builder based in an alternative reality of 19th century England, where you are the leader of the lost city on a frozen earth during a steampunky snow apocalypse. Now, we have to find what Frostpunk is in its core, and we have so many visual tropes in our heads because there's steampunk and there is frost, ice, snow. Now, we really can imagine playing this game, right? But here is a new challenge, because with this new creative setting, a new challenge rises. We need some strong and clear visual code to communicate those gameplay ideas to the players, so that Frostpunk cover didn't have to look like this, but more like this. And actually, you have all those, if you pay attention, you have all those elements I have listed before apparent on that cover. You have the icy walls, the storm and snow, and the steampunk generator in the middle, surrounded by the city and and with you as a leader in the center. And there's an angry mob, of course, that's ready to overthrow you at any given moment. But the thing is that getting to that image, it was a long way. Before Frostpunk got its frozen shape, there were some first prototypes created under the codename Industrial. And it was an idea for a steampunk city builder with sociotech elements of some sort. But we wanted once again to ask important questions, to give moral dilemmas to the players. We wanted to see what a society is capable to do when it's pushed to the limits. So in order to do so, we needed to take our game to way harsher circumstances. It's not changing. I don't know why. There's an epic picture that should be apparent. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm missing slides. Anyway, that's where the frost came up. The whole life in the world might disappear in this frozen apocalypse. And your city might really be the last city on Earth. Now, whole life in the world is at stakes. So we're amplifying the message and we're amplifying the dilemmas that we want our players to face. And this concept of the whole appeared. At first, that was a strictly artistic concept. And we knew we want to have some kind of generator that would, use the steam energy, but we didn't take the central part as literal as it ended up in the final product. But among our concept artists, this very iconic central alignment started to emerge, and at some point it became clear to all of us that this is a direction that we should be heading. Because in the end, that whole gave us some priceless boundaries, now making our city a more intimate place, but also amplifying the feeling of alienation, this claustrophobic feeling we were looking for. Now this hall, on one hand, it is your home, it is your shelter, just like in this war of mine, but also this hall may as well become your grave. Now, the hall became an important world-building element for Frostpunk, but it also became a narrative device. And it helped to reshape the game on yet another level. With a circular hall around the central place generator, it became clear to us that we have to create a circular placement system for buildings and streets. So it was not an easy process and required hard work and many iterations from all of our departments, but what we ended up with was a fresh and unique gameplay experience. And all those things, all of that, had allowed us to transform those early industrial prototypes into the final image of the city. But that is only one layer of Frostpunk. Now this is where all the economic and city building stuff happens. But what made Frostpunk so special lies deeper. It is like the beating heart and soul of the game. And what I'm talking about are obviously again the people, the society. Citizens of the last city on Earth. Now, these are the people that you are supposed to guide through the storm as a player. But how to represent them in a title like this, and most importantly, how to represent and communicate their needs visually. First, first of all, we had to know how our people should look like. So we looked through many references, of course, from 19th century, but from the very beginning, we wanted to create something unique and add some steam technology, winter clothing, etc. So we needed some unifying elements. That's how very early in concepting phase, we came up with this unique Frostpunk lantern, because we needed some elements that would unify our people no matter the gender, age, or class, from regular workers to engineers, etc. And in game, at the city level, you can see every single person that's walking around the buildings. You can actually click on every single citizen and the game shows you their portrait, their name, occupation, to show you some basic informations. And that's all great stuff. But it still didn't address all of our needs. Still, it was all about a single person in a large city, and it was not enough to describe the society. To show people as a society, to show their collective emotions, we needed to invent some special channels of communication, to show their needs, show their demands, and then show the consequences of our ruling. And the first channel we invented was a special pop-up window we called CTA, which means call to action. And those messages, they pop up during our game to mark some important events, and they require your reaction as a leader. But we didn't want to make those pop-ups UI heavy. We didn't want to have just windows filled with text. Many strategic games fall into that, and we were not creating a strategic games per se. So we wanted to show the emotions. For that, we needed to have some key visuals. And we started with animations, and it looked great. It was really interesting. However, there was a big problem. We were not able to pull it off. That approach was extremely heavy in production, and we needed to show a lot of those events, but also show big groups of people, their collective emotions. So at this point, we had to scale down. And we scaled down our approach to some 2D parallax motion, and it turned out that this solution was more than good enough in artistic terms, but we also got ourselves some flexibility regarding iterations. Now, keep in mind we had over 600 of those events which had to be supported by art, and some of them were being iterated even few days before we had our review built. Here you can see this kind of 2D motion we ended up with. We were able to show larger groups of people. But what's more important, we can show their faces and we can show, once again, their emotions. In here, people are coming angry about thefts that are happening in the city. So you have to decide what you're going to do with it. And it comes with consequences. Because in those images, through those CTAs, we can show progression of those emotions. You've got 3 steps of anger shown in CTA window here. The first level, it's still quite calm when they come to you with a problem. Now, what happens next depends on your decisions. The second level of anger is when they protest and they demand changes. And you can see we're using those same people, same faces, to present how they change their attitude toward you as a leader. And the third time they come is when they riot, and that is actually the last time when they ever come to you. So, what I told you so far was about reacting to some events, showing the players some indicators of their wrong or well-doings. But as a ruler of the city, you also have to think ahead. You need to plan, you need to build strategies. And that leads us to the final layer, this final channel of communication. And it is something called a book of laws. Now, in Book of Laws, you can sign rules and laws that will shape the society, that will affect life of people in your city. The decisions you make here are irreversible, and some of them are really tough. Like, for example, one of the very first laws that you might sign is the child labor. So by putting illustrations in Book of Laws, we want to show how our city will be affected by the decision. And in this case, we have to show those children going to work, because at this very moment you're deciding if your new generation is going to work in coal mines. And sure, from an economical point of view, it makes sense. We will have more hands on board, and you really need those hands on board. But what about those people? We needed to picture that image in front of a player, and I would argue that it could not be done just with a plain text. Now, in Frostpunk, we didn't want our players to treat people as yet another resource, as another number, a statistic, like choosing between coal and people. You take a look at how much space of the screen is assigned for the text and how much for the picture of an actual person doing this. So by those images, we're showing what can happen to our people. Should we sign up law for hospitals, for example? Just don't think about people in your game as a bunch of zeros and ones. When you're signing a law for amputation, we want you to look in the eyes of a person that's going to be affected by the law and then make your final decision. So for a brief summary here, for us at 11-bit, the message is the key. And it's never art or design or code or any other element of the game per se. It's always emotions and the gameplay and the experience that comes first. You have to know what you want to say and know why you want to say it. And then you need to find a way of how are you going to say it. And from my perspective as a lead artist, the game message must be converted to the visual language of the game. The art must always be true to the game meaning, and the art must always amplify that message. So that's all from me today. Thank you very much. And I'll be happy to answer some of your questions. We can have Q&A, but also I'll be walking around, so you can catch me in the corridor or something. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Are we using microphone or?
Yeah, I think they can use their voice.
Okay, so who was first? Yeah.
So I don't want you to read this as a criticism. I'm asking for this is a question.
Sure.
Not a criticism. So when you try to convey the feeling of a person with the art image being large and the text being small and so on, did you do any kind of research or thoughts into how much of that is interpreted as like general artwork instead of like being something within your game itself? Like for example, did you try, for example, showing some kind of thing from the actual gameplay world instead, and what the difference or the reaction is, or something like that?
Well, you know, for us it is always a process, and it's also a process of testing it a lot, of testing it inside the company and then using the outside testing to understand how people, you know, how do they feel with it. We have a very long questionnaires, and we're asking for this very specifically. We're even sometimes we're recording those tests to understand how people interact. Because when it comes to research, our designers, there are many designers with a great psychological background, for example, but when it comes to something so technical as deciding of the size of the picture versus text on the screen, we didn't make a whole lot of research for that element, right? So we were using some of our intuition and some of our knowledge, and then we hoped it's gonna work, and we were testing and testing until we felt like this should work. This should be this experience that we were looking for.
Quickly before you
Yeah.
take another question, can you also repeat the question to the mic so we
Okay.
can to the stream as well?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly. That's not that easy. Okay, who was next?
Yeah, my question was also about playtesting, and mainly was it all internal testing, or did you have an outside group that you did testing?
Well, so yeah. So did you hear the question? I think it was good. Yeah. So we do have quite large QA team in our like in-house QA team, but we're also doing a lot of focus testing on each big milestone. We're doing runs of outside focus tests. Yeah.
How much time does your company spend on designing things compared to losing things? Like ballparking?
Yeah. I would say like 80%, like a lot of time. Like the design team is the biggest part of every project, and also other teams are really strong, like design wise. Like I'm, for example, a lead artist, but I also have a lot of design tasks that I would actually say I'm doing more design than art at the moment, at least. Um, yeah.
Can you say anything about like if you have currently some kind of project going on, what kind of ideas?
Yeah, well, actually, right now it's officially announced we have two projects that we're working on, and I can't say anything else. It's called the code name is Project 8, and it's not a sci-fi name. It's just our eighth game, and that's it. Yeah, I can't say anything else.
Yeah, I understand.
Yep.
You've been talking a lot about the message. How often, or let me just start with, when does the message come into production? Is it the first thing you start off with, and how often does it change?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you didn't hear that, the question is how early or how late in the process the message appears, right? Is that correct? So the thing with us is it's different with every single project. We're actually one project in the company is very early in the process, and we're asking ourselves this question all the time. Like this war of mine, for example. First, it was the mechanical idea, and while a small part of the team was working on some shelter mechanics, then the other part of the team was looking for something there. And actually, the head of our studio has read this report book from Sarajevo, and that was like the inspiration to we should do that. With Frostpunk, it was a bit different, and with our other project, it's also changing. Yeah. Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit, but you mentioned how you have to balance like how subtle versus how obvious you want to make your message.
Mm-hmm.
Do you also think on like how do you make it not to bleed? Like even if you're delivering the message in a like suitable, subtle way, do you try to balance it with how to make the entire game not horribly depressing?
You have to put some humor in it. I actually think we should put more humor in. And no, the thing is, it's always different. It was so different from this war of mine to Frostpunk. Like with this war of mine, the danger was way closer, like was way bigger. Like the danger of, for example, being too hardcore. Like that was we always had to have that in mind. Like we can't go, gory, right? We have to avoid it. But avoiding being too subtle was really easier. But with Frostpunk, it was really different because those CTAs, I had just showed you a few in this presentation, but there are so many things. I remember the one about opening like some people destroying brothels in the city, and I remember the first CTA was like a broken rose with some blood on snow. It was like nothing. It was a fluffy picture. So because there were so many of them, we many times had to have those meetings where sometimes few people were sitting and looking at a single picture and 5 different versions of a single CTA just to decide which one like delivers the message. So because the idea was, I actually forgot about, I forgot to tell you this, but the idea was to try to deliver the message without even reading the text. Like you only look at the picture and you know what's going on here, right? Yep.
First of all, I think you guys are doing some very brave stuff, some very high-risk stuff.
Thank you.
How do you stay on the message? How do you keep confidence in that message through the production process? And I suspect a few people saying you can't possibly do that.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, every time there's an important meeting, because sometimes we have meetings where you have to decide like some things that's gonna affect your work for months, so we have to decide right now. And then we have we have the huge whiteboards on walls, and we're just writing down things like in war not everyone is a soldier, or something like this, right? And or the city must survive, or what is your society capable of, things like this. And we have to, every decision we're looking at it like, does it support the message or it doesn't? So Yeah, that's it. Does it answer the question? Because I think like this question is we could talk for hours actually about that.
Do you ever feel pressure to change the message, make it a little lighter? I mean, you guys enjoyed great commercial success.
Yeah, especially it was maybe a bit difficult, but it was great. Like in creative terms, when we were working on the DLCs to this War of Mine, because we had released the series of narrative-driven stories. It's called this War of Mine stories, and at each one of them, we wanted to touch a different aspect of war. Like because the main game was all about war drama in general, but then we had the third one was about dealing with loss, the second one was about the price of information, and the third one was about the protecting art, or the price of art in during wartime. And because these were some new topics, it was very tempting to go a bit too far in a new territory, because well, we're talking about something different now, so maybe we don't have to stick to those rules. But it's always a balance, and we're always like thinking a lot. So it's between leads and the heads of the studio. We have sometimes we sit for a few hours and then we decide. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I was just thinking, how how do you come up with the limits to the development
Mhm.
time and
You mean like the limit of the time we spend on making the game?
softwares, like if you want to make it like bigger.
Hmm. Well, you always want to make it as fast as possible, and I was actually talking with Thomas today, the next speaker, about how I'm always so optimistic starting new thing. Like this time it's gonna be smooth, and this time it's gonna be the exact time we need. The great luxury we have is that we are self-publishing, so we have a lot of freedom in those terms. So Frostpunk, it was supposed to come out earlier, but we were able to pull it off once we felt it is ready to be on the market. And it's the same with every other release. Like the console we announced for the summer, but it's coming in autumn because we felt like in the summer it's not gonna be as good as we want it to be. Anyone else? Yeah.
What's your message? One thing you say to all of us here, like not from your company, just
Yeah, just from me. But in terms of creating games, or because
like
all right. That's broad questions are always the best. No, my message is make games. Make games. Do it. Just do it, because my boss, my art director, he has a whole speech he had it at GDC about why do we make games? Why do we even bother? And I like this topic, but my answer is immediate. Like, do this because this is the pinnacle of modern media. The fact that you can engage in it, no matter what you're going to do. I really like our games. I love doing them. But usually every day I don't play something as depressing, because I don't have much time to play lately, so I need something fast and I play Mario. But the thing is, this market is so broad and there's so many to do and there's so many things, ideas you can convey into this medium, and there's no better medium to do that. Just like that. Yeah. Is it okay?
yeah, that's
Okay.
awesome.
Did someone write it down?
It's on stream and it's
Oh no! Jeez. If I had only known. Perfect. Do we have time for more?
one more.
One more. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. How much does QA and UX influence your art decisions, and where do you draw the line between the vision of the artist
Mhm.
and what the QA feels?
Okay. If I will repeat it. How much does the QA have like in decision making when it comes to creative decisions, right? It also depends on the project, but for our last release that I was working on, it was the last DLC to this War of Mine. I actually sat down between to QA guys because I wanted to exchange information very fast. And also at some point when we have a little bit of a problem and we had to speed up things just to avoid, you know, going in a bad direction, we had to check a lot of stuff, then a main QA person from our team was always involved in the meetings with leads when some important decisions were made, so that the QA team knows what we're doing, so that QA teams really knows what we're all working on, because sometimes it's not that obvious. Sometimes so many companies like fall into this problem where QA is a separate thing, and then QA doesn't really know what is testing. So that's what we want to avoid. Yeah. All right. So I think that's it, right? If you want to talk more, I'll be around. Thank you very much again.